wonderful people all over this country. She is a beautiful
Guyana will become the next Dubai, and we, the citizens of Guyana, are super excited to benefit from our homeland the same way the citizens of Dubai benefit from theirs.
This is what life is like for citizens from the Emirate of
Guyana will become the next Dubai.
with wonderful people all over this country. She is a beautiful Guyana.
Greetings to everyone in Guyana, the Caribbean, the diaspora, and around the world. You're listening to Globespan Television, live from New York City. Thanks to Noor Singh for making this program available, and to Devin Bissoon and Ryan Gobin, our technical experts. My colleague, Charles Sugrim, is not here tonight. He's on special assignment. And for all of you listeners, go to YouTube or Facebook and type in Globespan 24/7, Globespan TV 24/7, and you can listen to us as well. Tonight, we have a special guest who is no stranger to us here. He is the CEO for Gaisuku, the Chief Executive Officer of Gaisuku, and he's no other than Mr. Sesnarayan Singh. Ses, welcome to Globespan Television tonight.
Thank you very much, Dr. Rose, and good night to all your listening audience.
Thank you. Now, my first question to you. Can you explain to our listeners why you took such a huge job, and Gaisuku is now the second largest employer in the country?
You know, history shaped choices. My father was a sugar man. He used to be in the sugar industry, and I was always enthused by it. And as you know, for 20 plus years, I've been researching and writing about sugar. And an opportunity was presented to me in 2020 to say, well, fine, you talk about this sugar industry, put some effort into it, and maybe you should apply that passion to actually putting some effort into helping the stabilization of the sugar industry. And I took the opportunity because I've always wanted to do national service. And I'll tell you a story. In 1989, when I finished Queen's College, finishing with 4A levels, I applied actually to join the Guyana Defense Force. But as a young man, I was always politically aware, being a member of the PYO, and I don't know why, but I never got in. I thought I was fit. I thought I was coming from Queen's College. I should have gotten in. So I've always wanted to do something for the best interest of my country, and Gaisuku was the perfect opportunity to see something that I found to be broken and try my utmost with all the skills and talent that I have to try to stabilize it and hopefully assist in the turning around of the industry. It is not an easy industry, but it is the best training ground in this entire country. It helps people to understand human development at a micro and a macro level. So for me, this is an excitement. Personally, it's an excitement, but what is more importantly is an opportunity to do national service.
Good. You've been there now for almost 3 years. Can you tell our listeners when you became the CEO, the condition you found the 4 sugar estates that were shuttered by the Granger administration, and also the ones that were operating, Albion, Blaymont, and Iflot? Can you tell us the conditions you found those sugar estates in?
Look, Dr. Rose, this will take a little bit of speaking, but I want to ponder on it. You know, every Guyanese who understand the economic and social inner working of rural Berbice and rural Demerara are acutely aware that the sugar industry remains an essential element to the socioeconomic framework of these population centers. Those of us who've been checking the numbers, they will know that over 150,000 people are in these population centers. A resilient sugar industry is just the opportunity to set the framework. It's actually one of the better economic engine to set the framework for the economic survival or economic growth even of the citizens in these areas. And it guarantees social calm. A lot of people do not understand how important social calm is to rural Guyana. It's very, very important. And that's the role that the sugar industry serves. A man with money in his pocket and assets think a lot before he or she does something that it's unlawful. The sugar industry today pumps close to $12 billion of real income into the pockets of the ordinary man and woman across rural Berbice and rural Demerara. That is not small change. That is bringing social peace. That is bringing economic power to thousands of Guyanese. And I'm not just talking about the 7,747 Guyanese directly involved in the sugar industry. I'm talking about their family, their neighbors, every one of the beneficiaries from them, the shop owners, Rose Hall Town. They will tell you Rose Hall Town will die if there's no sugar. It will literally dry up and die if there's no sugar industry. And these are critical things. The sugar industry is actually now, because we're doing the investment in Rose Hall, is directly affecting New Amsterdam in a positive way. So the question you asked, what I found at the first place I went to, and this was not when I was not even the CEO of Gaisuku, I was a board member of NISIL And myself and Arcade Sharman, I think, Paul Chung, who was the chairman of NISIL, went to Rose Hall. And what I saw was a revelation. The closest I came to what I saw at Rose Hall in August 2020 was what I saw in a town in rural Pennsylvania called Colesville, Pennsylvania. But Rose Hall was 10 times worse than what I saw at Colesville, Pennsylvania. Colesville was an old coal town in Pennsylvania. And of course, those towns were retired and it was total annihilation, human annihilation, where the main streets were totally destroyed. But what I saw in Kanji was 10 times worse. The closure of those 4 estates had far-reaching economic implication for many, many Guyanese. And this was revealed in a study done by Dr. Thomas Singh. So when I went to Rose Hall, what I saw was a factory where, you know, this is the duplicity I witnessed. It's bothering, because I remember once the Village Voice newspaper came out, well, oh, the roofs were leaking when we were trying to rebuild those roofs. But those leaking roofs, those gaping holes in the roof of that estate and that factory was there in August 2020 when I turned up. Huge, huge hole. And as the rain pours down, you know, the big mistake they've made when they closed those estates, they did not even decommission it. It is engineeringly decent. When you close a factory, you decommission it. But the indecency was so high that they just turned up, put padlocks, tell the people go home. So what happened? All the motors were left to rust. All the engines were left to rust. We're talking about multi-million-dollar generators just left to rust. And the gaping holes in the roof expanded by 2020. You know, these things were closed in 2017. But 3 years of idleness created vines all over this place, the elements of the weather coming down and damaging all these equipment, billions of dollars of equipment at Rose Hall. The steel structure was left to rot. You thought you were in some kind of a sci-fi movie when you were there going through this. The gates of the workshop were left open, tools just scattered on the ground like people were chased out of the place. The boilers, bricks were falling off the boilers at that point in time. And the only thing I saw was stray dogs in the place. As to the field, when we went, it was a mini forest. It wasn't canes anymore. There were small trees blossoming into becoming seasoned trees. Nothing of worth was left. See, everything was just abandoned. The houses were left in a decrepit state, a damaged state, a decrepit state. And the navigation canals were full with bushes that you could have you couldn't even cross unless you want to walk across that bush. The field equipment, prime movers like tractors and implements. Fortunately, they couldn't use the implements in our industry, so they were left to rot in the open. But the tractors were missing. We were then told that the tractors were moved to hinterland areas to do logging by the then administration or whoever was controlling those equipment. And this was the state of affair. Nothing moved at Rose Hall when we were there. And it was the same story repeated at every one of the estate. Actually, when we went to Wales, there wasn't even a factory, just a shell. I don't know who eats out metal that quickly. It was as if people just were eating out the metal. It was bad. And what I found was a business model that was unrealistic. I found a situation in Gaisuku where budgets were a fairy tale. People are just putting together numbers on a spreadsheet to present an image and then go again when they run out of money with the peer pressure of saying that they have to get money. So, and there was a very, very demotivated team, very, very demotivated team. I saw a lot of talented young men and women who were trying their best to become MacGyvers, trying to keep those factories alive, the ones that were alive at Albion, Blairmont, and Iflat. In 2019, you know how much they spent on capital investment in the estate? $77 million. We have spent $17 billion in 3 years retooling those estates and rebuilding the Rose Hall estate from scratch. It wasn't an easy project, but it is where it is now. Over those 5 years that before we came in 2020, they spent an aggregate under $500 million on capital items to keep these estates open. It was as if there was a deliberate strategy to destroy the sugar industry. And you know, Doc, it is bothersome because it was an attitude of mind as if this group of people wanted to break the sugar workers into submission by making them deliberately poor, by withdrawing what they were accustomed to before, a job. As simple as that, a job. It was really a human development disaster. So every Guyanese, I am telling you now this story. I really don't like being on the media anymore because I really want to enjoy doing my work. But I really had to come and talk to you alone, Doc. And ask the media. I avoid them. I avoid the media because for me, it's a passion now. After I see so much poverty, it's so important that we fulfill the mandate set to us by the president, because President Irfan Ali, there's one thing we can say about him. He continues to commit to the sugar workers of Guyana, the people of Guyana. And he's committed to that dream. And only on Saturday, he was talking about his vision to ensure that the sugar industry remains one that is here to stay. Yes, there's lots of improvement that needs to be made. Yes, we have to do more value-added products. Yes, we have to move up the value chain. Yes, we have to mechanize where there are gaps without displacing human beings. Yes, we have to bring more modern varieties that are more productive to the industry. Yes, we have to improve the cane yields. Yes, we have to bring operational efficiencies, higher operation efficiencies to an industry. Yes, there need to be more private participation in Gaisuku. We're not going to deny any of these things, but you don't do these things with a mentality and an attitude of mind of destruction. And that is what I found when I reached here. I found a situation where there was an embedded attitude of mind by the people who were there before 2020, 2019, between 2016 and 2019, and part of 2020, deliberately trying to destroy. It is something that is hard to fathom, because who deliberately attempts to destroy human beings? I cannot understand it. So they took advantage of the vulnerable, and they used all opportunities to take away income as a tool to impoverish those 7,000 people who were sent on the breadline in rural Demerara and rural Berbice. For me, Doc, that is anti-national, that is anti-patriotic, that is anti-human development. And those people should never be forgiven. Those people who conducted this destruction should never be forgiven by the Guyanese people. Never.
Okay, thanks. Now, it was Booker's, and then it became Gaisuku. But I read some time ago where Booker's of itself, I don't know if this continued under Gaisuku, actually maintained community centers in different villages, communities where the sugar estates were, and sports fields and so forth that produced cricketers like Rohan Kanai, Basil Butcher, Joe Solomon, that's Port Morant, and Roy Fredericks in Blaymont and so forth. Now, so Booker's had invested heavily into improving the communities across the country. Has Gaisuku been doing that, or under your tenure, has that continued?
Well, we are still doing a lot of maintenance of the Albion Sports Complex, which still is the premier sports facility in Berbice. But as you know, the government of Guyana is building a state-of-the-art facility at Palmyra in Kanji. So Gaisuku has to, at this time of our life, we have to stay focused on one simple thing: stabilization. And for us to do stabilization, it means that we must focus on what is the value-added activity. While I agree with you that these things are important, we're looking for partnership all the time on it, and we're collaborating with the government of Guyana in supporting these things. But our primary function right now is restoring the capacity of the operating estates. So, because at the end of the day, it's a business, and Gaisuku has to wean itself off of the government of Guyana via the subventions. So the whole model for Gaisuku is very simple: stabilizing the operating estate, realigning our market mix, engage in cost-cutting measures around non-value-added activities, unlocking value from our non-core assets. And I'll tell you some of the projects we're doing around that. So while Albion Sports Complex is very, very important to our people, if we have $10, we have to spend it first on the fields and the factories. I mean, the reality is the navigational system at Gaisuku has not been rehabilitated in over a decade. And in the old days, the Booker days you talk about, they had a system where every year a percentage of the navigational system is rehabilitated. Every year a percentage of the pond fleet is rehabilitated. These things were totally abandoned. And it's only last year we were able, for the first time in over 5 years, to construct some ponds. And now we're shift that gear to constructing rebottoming ponds at all the estates, including Skeldon. So Skeldon is busy helping, because we have to rebuild the asset base of the company. You got to have assets, you have to have revenue generators before you can engage in some of these things. So, but one of the things that I'm very proud of is we've been able to re-energize the medical system. And that is very, very important to us, because we want our workers to have good access to health education, good access to basic primary health care, and timely access. We don't want people to be engaged in a system that consume a lot of their time. They come to the healthcare clinics, within an hour they're in and out. Their families are also beneficiaries of that. And that is one of the contributions we're giving back to the communities. Retirees, the pensioners use it a lot. And it works. And it brings some level of support to the national system. So yes, we are doing some social engineering. but our primary aim is stabilizing the hardcore revenue generation operations of the industry.
You have written extensively on the sugar industry in Guyana, and I read some of those papers you have actually written before. Now, but most Guyanese are not aware of the process that involves sugar production. Can you explain to our listeners the process, starting from how sugar is manufactured, starting from tilling up the land to planting of the sugar cane, to cutting, to milling, and to bagging of the sugar?
Dr. Rose, you're taking us all back to school here. This is your professorial side coming out here. But let's talk about it. It's an extensive process, and that's why it's a very good question, because I get a sense that a fair bit of our country doesn't understand what happens in the sugar industry. So it's a good question. So how sugar is conceived from inception to the point when it's bagged. So the very first thing that we have and we need to master is to ensure that we have excellent certified seed cane. This is the seed cane that goes into the planting process. So you engage in a tillage process, which is usually 3 stages or 2 stages, depending on the clod size or the refinement that you get out of the land. So we have something called, which was written by, and I must recognize a great sugar leader called Bigan Chandra and Dr. David Eastwood. 2 great sugar experts wrote something called our agricultural guidelines. Contributed tremendous amount of knowledge to us, the ancestors of them. So the very first thing is good tillage must be at a depth of between 10 to 12 inches. And we do it, there's a first plow that has to be done at that depth. It requires huge machine, you know. I think a couple of years ago, we had a big debate around whether we're going to bring American tractors or Mexican tractors, fixed frame versus articulate. Well, sugar cannot use the tractors used in the rice industry. You got to use bigger tractor to be able to get the right depth to achieve the right level of germination and access to the nutrition. So after the first plow is done, there's a further refinement happening, which develops a clod size, which is the clay clumps, into 2 to 3 inches. The size of a fist of hand is usually a good measure. This project is done to ensure that we get good seed and soil contact. See, the seed material must contact effectively with the soil and also unleash the moisture and nutritional content of that soil to have maximum potential growth. So once the tillage is done to the right standards, and we have guidelines that tells our estate managers and their agriculture managers, and it is the training material that passes down all the way to the foremen and the tractor operators. Once that is done, you then get into the planting process. Now you got to understand something. There's a big misconception that why we're not expanding faster. You can only till when there's the right amount of opportunity days, bright sunshine. Today, great tillage opportunity. We've had 0 rainfall, perfect opportunity for tillage. So we're doing well at the tillage right now. But you got to remember, from November 2020 to January 2023, this country has had higher than normal rainfall, inordinate amount of rainfall. In those conditions, you can't do tillage. You cannot. And thus, it would have caused some level of destruction. And I'll tell you why. In 2021, we had a national disaster where the canes were underwater for 65 days. 28% of the canes got totally destroyed. Totally destroyed. The stock of standing cane moved from about 1.1 million metric tons of cane to 750,000 metric tons of cane. So since that flood, the difficult task was placed into the hands of the estate managers to replant over 250,000 metric tons of standing cane. The reality is it was a struggle because of the preponderance of rain. Now, since February, we've had better than normal conditions to plant and till. So we've been tilling aggressively, and fortunately, all our tractors start arriving this year. So Gaisuku is in a good position whereby we have bought all of our tillage tractors. We don't need to go out there next year looking for tractors. We're not buying any tillage tractor next year. We're not. This is the year where we've completed that project. And it was delayed, but maybe it was delayed with good reason because the rain was there. But we had good conditions this year and our chances of tillage will be improved. I understand from the weather people that next year we'll also have a fair year with regards to good tillage. Now, after that is the planting. We have to maximize our yields to get the best harvest. And to get that, you need the best quality seed cane material. And you usually take seed cane material from the fields that are 6 to 7 months old and that are generally infest free. So there's some level of inspection happening. Timing between cutting those seed cane and planting is extremely important because there's a process called germination which will be impeded if that planting material is not planted on time. So it's very important we plant within, it is usually between 2 to 3 days of cutting those cane. Then after that is the caring of the cane, good husbandry practice. This is all about timing and sequence, And the field managers, they know this to the back of their teeth. They know how to do this. The fertilization program, the pre-emergent herbicide treatment program to attack the weeds, how they protect the young canes and give them an opportunity to grow. You see, the challenge on the fields of Gaisuku is there's competition for the nutrients and the young canes have to be competing with weeds. So it's extremely important you win the battle with the weeds. And that is where the husbandry practice are very important. There's also another enemy of cane called rats. That has to be addressed. That's also very actively being addressed during this period of when we're monitoring the cane. So monitoring the growth, and we set up growth stations and so forth after 12 weeks. Constant observation of what is going on because you're checking things like the internode length. Well, you know what's that? In our common parlance, we call it a jointed cane. We're watching we're monitoring that. We're monitoring the girth of the cane, which is the fatness of the cane. And they all have to meet certain threshold values during this monitoring process. For example, the agronomist always advised me that cane grows 1 centimeter per day. And so you got to keep checking these things during the husbandry process. You also ensure that you always keep your eyes out on the invasion of weed. You must not allow the weed to win the battle between the growth of the cane and the infestation of these weeds. Now, then after that, of course, but this is what I want to make sure the Guyanese public know. Sugar cane is a perennial crop. It takes a full year towards maturation. A normal cane matures between 44 to 48 weeks. Sorry, 48 to 52 weeks. I apologize for that. Between 48 to 52 weeks, that's a year. So when you put a cane down now, you must expect it to be fully mature a year from now. In the rice industry, people are getting 3 crops in a year. Gaisuku are getting it one time. When you put it down, till next year, at that time, you can go back to get the full maturation of that cane. So, but we have some early maturing varieties, such as the DB 9633, which matures maybe 4 weeks earlier, 44 to 48 weeks. But everything hinges. We have a process whereby the agronomists and their team do daily maturity sampling. It's a simple process by testing the juice content to see and observing the cane to see how it's moving along. And watching the trends and establishing how that field is growing. And every day they circulate from one field to the other so that they can get a fair idea of the batch of cane that they've identified for harvesting. So it is a very complex process, and getting the right mix between the mature fields and aligning that with your harvesting program. Again, it's a science. I mean, you go into the front lines and when you meet the cane cutter, they have a simple way of training themselves. No cabbage, low stump. 0 cabbage, no stump. And this is the secret to good harvesting, because you remove the trash content, you do clean burning, meaning you make sure that as much as the trash content is burnt away, the leaves and those kinds of things, and you cut the cane low stumping, and you try to minimize the cabbage by making sure the topping off, you do the top, doesn't carry too much trash with it. So we cut cane from mainly 2 types of bed. There's the Dutch bed, which can only accommodate manual harvesting, and there's the broad or English bed, the broad English bed where the mechanical harvesters are on. I'm happy to announce that only a month ago, Gaisuku got an additional harvester, and these things don't come cheaply. It's $80 million for a harvester. And so Gaisuku now have mechanical harvesting at Albion, Blairmont, and Iflat. But you can only mechanically harvest on fields that are mechanically ready to receive those harvesters. So for example, in the case of Albion, only 20% of those fields are mechanically ready. There's a conversion process that is having to be done, but it's very expensive, very expensive. And thus, while the desire is to do conversion, there's 2 factors that we have to consider. One, we get a 70% turnout in the industry. So those are the manual harvesters. Under this government, under no circumstances will any of those cane cutters be displaced, none of them. So there's a 30% gap. That 30% gap, that is where we're pushing the mechanization project. So Albion needs to get up to 30%. So we have 70% manual labor, 30% mechanized. Mechanization is an interesting process because one of those mechanical harvesters replaces 254 cane cutters. So, but it's all about the social engineering. And I think this is where the Granger administration got it all wrong. They just didn't get close enough to the villages to really understand the required social engineering that is needed in an industry like the sugar industry. It is not a straightforward business proposition. While we all, I mean, I went to business school, while we all want and aspire to making sure that the business model is resilient, you cannot discount the required social engineering that is needed. And you can remember when now President Irfan Ali, His Excellency, was then a front bencher on the opposition, when he was in the negotiations on making sure we have an understanding of what Mr. Ramjatan and Nagaputu were trying to attempt. And he called at that time, I don't know if you remember, he called at that time for a socio-economic assessment. I think it was 2017, of the sugar industry before you make any decision on closure. And he was totally ignored by Ramjatan and Nagamoto. Actually, I think, and I want to quote, I had this thing somewhere I read last week. There is a quote where Mr. Ramjatan said something, and this is what he said. And these are facts. These are facts, and they can be assigned to a newspaper column. So I am someone who try my best to stay with facts. So when they did that, he said the PPP and GAU can pay for the social and economic assessment. That's what Mr. Ramjatan said to them. And I thought that was rather callous and very, very emotionally unintelligent. Now today, the same man who did that to the sugar industry, did that to sugar workers, is all of a sudden so in love with sugar workers today and telling them that he'll represent them and he will take care of them. But the reality is, when they needed him to take care of them in 2016 and 2017, that is when he abandoned them. So I don't believe any of the nonsense he's saying now, because it's all grounded in a framework of subterfuge and deception. Subterfuge and deception. You know, you had to be on the receiving end to understand. And when I walk, because I am a CEO who walked the field, and when you talk to the ordinary folks in Kanji, then is when you get a grasp of the massive economic destruction that occurred. It is sickening to listen to some of these stories. And I'll go so far as to say, one story I was told, you know, you have those migrants just come back from abroad in their retirement stage and so forth, build a nice little house, and, you know, retirees got a little bit more money. Like you, Dr. Rose, a retiree come back to Guyana, always got a little extra money in your pocket. Some of these members of this community found themselves cleaning those houses, and to get a little extra money, were offering their bodies as a rental instrument to some of those migrants. This is what Ramjatan and Nagamoto did to those people. This is what they did to them. They took away their human dignity. Their husband had a real job, and they took away their human dignity. But let me get back to the sugarcane process, because I think it's a very exciting thing to explain. Good transportation to the cane factory, and there's something critical in that called the burn to grind indicator. It must be, once you cut that cane, it must get in and be crushed in the factory within 48 hours. So there's a science to everything in sugar. And this is really to prevent the destruction of the sucrose by inverse sugar. So, so timely crushing of the cane to maximize the extraction of the sugar is critical. So then once that crushing happens, you get the juice, which is then heated, and this starts a process called clarification. And then from the clarification process, and the whole purpose of the clarification process is to get rid of the impurities, so to speak, from the cane juice. This means you get a better quality juice, which then goes to the evaporation stage, where water is further removed, bringing it closer to solidification, something we call the thicker syrup. And this syrup is then fed into a vacuum pan system where the crystals are allowed to grow. And as the crystals grow, then it goes into the crystallizer process, which continues this acceleration growth of the sugar crystals. And then via centrifugal process at the centrifugal station, the molasses is separated from the sugar crystals. So there's the first level of crystallization, which yields A sugar and A strike, or A sugar from an A strike, so to speak, leaving a residual mother liquor known as A molasses. This A molasses can then be further crystallized to yield what we call B strike sugar and a lower grade of molasses called B grade molasses. And then again, that you can strike again and again until you reach to what you call your final molasses. And then you package all of that. So that you can be as much as 6 strikes from one collection of magma. It's depending on the grade of the cane juice. So once molasses is diverted to those molasses tank, well, then that goes to DDL, and you know what happens there. They make rum out of it. And the sugar is dried, and then it goes to the packaging plant. And that is where it is bagged, either in packages or bags, or it's put on a truck, because we still are doing, well, sugar export to the United States market. But there's one element of that whole process called the trash. From, you know, once you take the juice out of the trash, what do you do with that trash? It's called bagasse. That is then burnt in the boilers as a source of energy. So during the grinding time, some of these factories are fuel neutral, meaning they don't burn any fossil fuel. And thus, the sugar industry is a fairly comprehensive thing, but that is it. So I know it was long, but I really wanted your audience to hear that process. And it can even go longer than that, but I had to condense it a little bit.
Okay. Now, prior to 2015, the PP government was subsidizing sugar. And after 2015, up to came to office, they were subsidizing the sugar industry as well. But they stopped. They said they can't continue, and this is why they closed the sugar estates in 2017. Now, sugar comes under agriculture. And I want to say this to all our listeners worldwide, that there is no country in the world that does not subsidize agriculture. All countries subsidize agriculture, every one of them. So my question to you is this. Do you think the subsidy given by this government, how important it was to reopen the sugar estate and at least try to bring sugar back and make it viable?
Well, first thing, I'm glad you made that point, because the first thing the listening audience needs to understand, the United States of America, the mecca of capitalism, the art of the private business, the home of private sector intervention and innovation, the federal government spends more than 30 billion US dollars a year on subsidizing agriculture via the...
Actually, it's 60 billion.
Well, the last number I saw was 30 billion, but if you're saying 60, I'm going to go with you. But the question is, the Cato Institute did say that. But the reality is, no one would want to subsidize agriculture in their right mind. But the question is, where sugar was in 2020 to where it is now, we're moving it in a direction where we're recapitalizing it and trying our very best, as I said, in our model to make it more resilient. But let's be very clear. Let's be very clear. When we walked into Gaisuku in 2020, the sugar and molasses sales could not cover the wages and salaries. One of the very first acts His Excellency the President did was to do a subvention to Gaisuku to pay some wages and to pay off the private cane farmers for debts owed. Today, 96 cents of every dollar earned by Gaisuku goes towards wages and salaries. So it's moved from a position where it was 102% in 2020 to now 96%. So Gaisuku, the model is working, but it requires time and it requires careful protection. So if as you rightly said, every country of the world protects their agriculture industry, Guyana is also duty bound to protect its agriculture industry. And let me tell you something, the economics that I learned when I studied in England is very basic. A nation has a fiduciary duty to protect its stock of housing, its stock of agriculture crops, its manufacturing sector, its power generation capacity. You will never grow as a nation. You will never do well as a nation unless those four things are taken care of. And if you look carefully at what's happening nationally, Gas to Shore project is being built with a very focused attention, clear indication that whoever the thinkers and policymakers in Guyana today, they're thinking along the right path. Agriculture is being recapitalized, it's being supported. New forms of agriculture such as corn and soya is being developed. We are investing in a resilient and stable future. Once electricity gets sorted, the manufacturing sector is going to take off as a service center to oil and gas and anything else. And lastly, look at the stock of housing. It's multiplying. It's multiplying every single day. So I don't understand why that model couldn't work before, but it works now. And these are the mistakes. These are the mistakes that were made by the Granger administration. Big mistakes, big policy mistakes were made. Rather than shuttering the sugar industry down, you should have done the socio-economic assessment, understand the inner workings of what makes it happen, and then make the investment, whether it's public, private, whether it's public only, whether it's private sector, make the investment to make it grow. You do not destroy your agriculture sector. Any policymaker who's caught destroying their agriculture sector clearly is not fit for the job. Clearly, look at the great United States. You got anybody could touch those corn farmers? The federal government comes in with special programs to protect them. The rice farmers in America, protected by the government. The cane farmers in America, same thing. Any product. So when people tell you but all these public transfers to the agriculture sector is socialism and all these nonsense, they really need to have their heads examined, because the great capitalist state of the United States is one of the leaders of cash transfers to the agriculture sector.
That is true. Now, there's the big misconception in Guyana that most of the sugar workers are Indians, East Indians, and are PP supporters. But statistics have shown that 36% of all sugar workers are Afro or Black Guyanese. Now, you've been the CEO for Gaisuku for the past 3.5 years. Can you explain if this is true or false?
It is a misconception, you know. It is a very big misconception, and I'll give you an example. You know, let me start it this way. And I'm extremely disappointed in some of the elders of this country. Extremely disappointed. Because elders are supposed to teach the younger people how to evolve to betterment. And when you take advantage of the vulnerable and use all opportunities to take away income from them as a tool to impoverish them, as a strategy designed to bring them into political submission under the great misconception that they're East Indians. So when you do a strategy like that, you put two East Indians to lead the destruction of the sugar industry, Ramjatan and Nagamotu. But how uninformed and ignorant they were. Because let me tell you something. If they had conducted that socioeconomic study called for by Dr. Irfan Ali, they would have been more aware of the facts. And these are the facts. Every single sugar worker that they put on the bread line logged on to the message of Team Irfan Ali in 2020. Whether they were Indians, East Indians, whether they were Afro-Guyanese, they logged on to his message. So in their quest, to break a people who they see as politically aligned to Dr. Ali and his team, everyone got hurt. Everyone got hurt. And let me get the facts here for you. The empirical evidence will reveal 40% of the workers that were deliberately impoverished on the west bank of the Demerara in such a callous and calculated manner in 2016 were Afro-Guyanese. 40% of the workers who were deliberately impoverished when Wales Estate was closed were Afro-Guyanese. Again, 40% of the workers who they impoverished at Rose Hall came from areas such as New Amsterdam, Stanley Town, and other areas on the East Bank Berbice. And again, most of them were Afro-Guyanese. So this is a fundamental attitude of mind, one that reflects political meanness and economic dotishness. Political meanness and economic dotishness. To educate oneself, one must have compassion and not destroy in your haste to get at the other side. They never sought to understand the business model at Gaisuku. And you could have picked this up because even the management at that time at Gaisuku was having problems with Noel Holder and the others. Because they never sought to understand the business model and they never sought to understand what Gaisuku represented. So it is extremely important that I can tell you the model at Gaisuku is very, very simple. And we try our best to make sure that we do the necessary investment because it's important. I am totally in agreement. Cost-cutting measures have to happen. Stabilization has to happen. Moving up the value chain has to happen. Retraining has to happen. Diversifying into value-added sugar-related products have to happen. Those are all prerequisites to make the business more resilient. But you don't bring out an axe with your loose terms like right sizing and destroy the economic well-being of 7,000 human beings in such a callous and careless manner. It reflects an infantile economic thinking. It clearly illustrates that they did not think through the model. They did not think through what they were doing. But in their meanness, this attitude of meanness towards just taking this axe towards a large swath of rural folks in their quest to break them into submission from their ivory towers, they disconnected. They disconnected from the people. And that is the problem. So I'm telling you now, it was not right. It should not have been done that way. If there's any thought of any right sizing by any government, it should be backed by a socio-economic study where people understand, if I do this, then this is the consequence. If I do this, then this is the consequence. With rights and power comes responsibility. Just don't say, oh, I'm the boss, I will just do what I feel like doing. Responsibility must be, you know, when the crown is on your head, you have to be careful. When people's lives are in your hands, you have to be careful. And the basic economic strategy of taking away people's job is not the answer to Gaisuku's challenges or the sugar challenge. What we need to do is make sure that everybody can unleash their potential by retraining them, by bringing them into new value-added role. Let's give you an example. A guy might just be what you call a chain boy in the industry, retraining him to become a tractor operator. He gets a different salary entirely. So those are the kind of things that you got to be thinking about all the time, but not send him on the road. What is he going to do on the road? What is there for him to do on the road? So what they did is took a military attitude of carpet bombing everything in their quest to destroy this presumably support base. Well, guess what? Everybody logged on now. Everybody's logged on. Well, luckily that is now over. And for the last 3 years, I can assure you, the policy directive I've been given is to make this industry resilient, ready for the future, but with a clarity of mind that the sugar industry will never be abandoned by the government of Guyana once Dr. Irfan Ali is the president of this country.
Good. Now, as we getting more and more into the sugar industry, the questions are becoming much tougher. Now, you assumed the CEO, I think, was in September 2020. Am I right?
September 2020, so 3 years is gone, yes.
Right. Now, it took you 3 years to reopen Kanji Rosal Estate. Bear in mind, you said how you found it, how you found the condition of the estate was so terrible that you never thought it could have come back. But why it took you so long? Could it be done before?
98% of that rebuilding process was done by Guyanese. And you know there is a skills shortage in this country. But the very first thing that was required, what happened is that we started with a very good agenda, but then this great flood of 2021 came and it took us off our game because at that time it became survival, because you had to then switch gear to focus on keeping Albion, Claremont, and Iflot functional, improving their functionality. Then secondly, we had a major malfunction at Iflot that took that entire estate out of commission for a full crop. We have a shortage of engineers in Gaisuku, right? Remember what I'm saying here. So we have to spread these resources around as much as we can wherever a crisis is. And while the ambition is to open Rosal, there's a greater responsibility to produce sugar for Guyana. Our number one priority is to make sure every day there is enough sugar available for the local market. So after the floods, you know the floods happened in 2021, the destruction that happened in 2021 really destroyed the 2022 crop, totally destroyed it. As I told you when we were going through the process, it's a 12-month cycle. totally destroyed it. And so we had to rebuild from that. So with the limited amount of expertise we have, you have to concentrate them on doing what is your primary responsibility, which is stabilizing the operating estate. And while at the same time, with available resources, trying to build out this mega project. It's not a small project, it's a $9 billion project. It's not a small project. So I'm so grateful to the local talent that I met in this Gaisuku. They put their all into this. And there's even female technical skills in Rose Hall that have contributed to that estate. I'm so proud of them. One of the young ladies I met was from New Amsterdam, and the other one was from Kanji, somewhere in Kanji. So proud of them, and so many young people who've now thrown their entire backs into this process. For all of 2022, none of them took leave. They worked all year round to make this month, September 2023, a reality. None of them took leave. It was patriotism of the highest order. I cannot ask for better. I mean, I know this, the guy who led on lots of this is a guy called Vijay Govardhan in the factory. And I'll tell you cannot ask for more patriotism from those citizens and all those engineers below him, and you cannot ask for more patriotism. I have seen the best of a nation at Rose Hall, the best of a nation. This country is fortunate to have such citizens that I've seen in that Rose Hall estate. Very fortunate. These people can find a livelihood anywhere in the world, anywhere in the world. And you would have known from New York, graduates from the Port de Morant Technical Training Institute, they're working the train system in New York, doing excellently. They're working in the factories of Pennsylvania, doing excellently. They're all over the place where Guyanese are and doing very good. So we were fortunate that a small pool of them still remain in Guyana. And they were the ones who rebuilt that factory. Rose Hall, I tell everybody, Rose Hall is a made in Guyana, by Guyanese, for Guyanese project.
Good. Now, Rose Hall will be reopened, according to you, on September 23rd, which is 2 Saturdays from now. So what is your forecast when Rose Hall is added to the other 3 estates? What is your production forecast for the coming year for the country?
When you say coming year, I presume you're talking about 2024.
Yeah.
Well, that is being developed right now. This is September month where the 2024 budgets from all the agencies in the government are being developed. So that number is still a work in progress.
Now, you mentioned about engineers and so forth. Does Gaisuku have a qualified staff of personnel and laymen?
I don't think any corporation in this country, whether public or private sector, has its full complement of talent, required talent. And Gaisuku is no different from any corporation or private sector company in Guyana. I mean, I've seen a lot of businessmen have told me they've started to bring truck drivers from India to this country. Some have started to bring plumbers from Cuba to this country. Now, I mean, every business in this country requires talent. It's a national challenge.
Now, you have labored for the past 3 years to reopen the Rose Hall estate. It's Rose Hall Kanji estate. That will be opened up now on the 23rd. What is your next project? Which estate you will tackle next?
That is a policy decision. I am just the mere CEO. That's above my pay grade.
So you don't know. Go ahead.
I'm aware of some of the conversations, but I would leave that to the policymakers to announce on.
Okay. Do you think that the sugar industry in Guyana will ever become solvent again?
A very, 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 very good question. I believe strongly that there will be required some sort of public-private partnership in the sugar industry to make it the economic fundamentals are there to make it cash neutral or cash positive. The economic fundamentals are there. There are several bits of inefficiencies that needs to be worked on. I think it's too early right now to even be thinking about this, because right now, as I said to you, stage one was stabilization. That is almost there. We're almost there at that. Then stage two was to get Rosal going. That is almost there. But we're moving closer and closer to getting those completed. I mean, like, for example, as I said to you, this year will be when all of our tractors would have been bought. Next year, we have 0 tractors on our budget. Next year will be the year of repairing the navigation system, repairing the bridges, repairing the access dam. That is the focus next year. So these elements have to be sorted out first before we can talk about cash neutrality. Because you just heard how I talk from tillage all the way to bagging the sugar. It is many moving wheels, and all of them are not fully functional as yet. So we have to continually getting each wheel fixed so that this train can be on the road to cash neutrality. It is going in the right direction. And maybe I shouldn't say that because I'm the CEO, but from my belief, it is going in the right direction. But it's a work in progress.
How many new workers you'll be employing at the Rosal estate?
Well, how much have already been employed? Because we already have employed 1,200 new workers at Rosal. By the time we start fully harvesting, it will be about 1,400, going on to 1,500. So many citizens of New Amsterdam, Stanleytown, Edinburgh, Mara, Providence, Kanji, and all the villages on Kanji have been given employment at Gaisuku, at the Rosal estate. But one of the good things that I've seen is the amount of younger people coming into the industry at Rosal. It is a refreshing thing to see them.
Now, you have mentioned that you have very good relationship with the workers and the top management and everything else. What about your relationship with GAU?
I always respect the framework of the collective labor agreement. We have started to meet with GAU on dealing with a collection. It's an annual meeting we do with several steps. I think GAU has acted very responsibly in 2023. Very responsibly. GAU, NASI, and the smaller union called the Guyana Labor Union, very responsibly. They have worked with the workers in educating them, in understanding the direction that everyone is taking. And I can sense that we're all coming close together, aligning our ideas to be able to unleash the potentials of these estates in a much more coordinated manner. So I have nothing but good things to say about GAU in 2023. because they've acted extremely responsibly. That is the kind of partnership any management will want in rebuilding a company.
Well, there was a strike just about a week ago.
Mm-hmm.
What that strike entails, what it was about.
It's an unfortunate situation because
I think 60 workers were arrested.
well, I read that in the press, but Gaisuku wasn't involved in any of these. The reality is this. It was an unsanctioned strike. There is a claim for, and this claim is being, again, this is the disingenuous and subterfuge being peddled by people like Mr. Ramjatan. You know, you sent these guys on the streets in 2017. They found a home at Albion. They got work at Albion. While they were working all those years at Albion, 7,000 other people were on the streets kicking brick. Some people etched out a living by selling coconut, renting their bodies, doing all kinds of things just to get by. So it is a very difficult proposition to consider offering severance at this time, because what's the definition of severance? Severance is when a corporation says, we have no more need for you at this point in time, so we're sending you away. But we're not sending away anyone. Gaisuku's hiring people right now. We're doing the reverse of severance. So I don't understand where this debate about severance is emanating from. But when we found out, the intelligence gathered clearly revealed that it's a politically driven agenda to undermine the sugar industry as an act of shame for their failure. As an act of shame for their failure. And again, it's an attitude of mind buried or grounded in subterfuge and deception and misinformation. And let me make this clear to Mr. Ramjatan and any one of his cohorts. Subterfuge, deception, and misinformation will not be allowed to disturb the strategic objective of the Dr. Irfan Ali government on sugar. He needs to get that clear in his head, because we're clear and united in our mind. We want to create wealth for the 7,747 souls that work in the sugar industry and their families. Let him get that very clear. Subterfuge, deception, and misinformation will not be allowed to disturb the strategic objective of this industry under Dr. Irfan Ali. And His Excellency, the President, reiterated that only last Saturday. And he needs to get that clear in his mind. This is not child's play. You cannot play with the people's lives. We will not allow it.
Okay, some claim that Gaisuku is top heavy, meaning that there are more top management than, well, not than workers, but there are too many top management. Now, can you tell us the current structure of Gaisuku, starting with you? Give me the top 6 tiers. Start with you as the CEO. Below you is who?
Well, you have what you call the executive leadership. There's the CEO, who's the apex of that executive leadership. There's the head of HR. There's the agriculture director. There's the factory director. Well, technical director we call them now, but it's basically in charge of the factories, the factory operations. And there's the head of finance. So that's basically the executive structure that we have at head office. Then you have the estate managers reporting to me. So right now I have 5 estate managers. One estate manager who's a lady, Miss Ramapasad. She's managing the 2 estates that we are having in a state of readiness, Enmore and Skeldon combined. So she's doing joint management of that. And then we have 4 estate managers on the active estate, meaning Blairmont, Rose Hall, Albion, and Iflat, right? So we have Houghton Griffith at Iflat, we have Trevor Shift Prasad at Blairmont, we have Vijay Govardhan at Rose Hall, and Yudhishthir Mana at Albion.
You spoke about Enmore, that she's managing Enmore and Skeldon. Is Enmore on your next list?
As I said to you earlier, I will be listening to the policy directives, and we will execute, because you see, these reinvestment projects, like what we did at Rose Hall, require some level of government intervention, financing, and that also forms part of the national budget. So Gaisuku cannot do what it feels like doing. We're part of a team, and we have to work collaboratively with the policymakers in realizing the policy ambitions of the policymakers.
You spoke about value-added products.
Mm-hmm.
Explain to our listeners what that meant.
Well, the ambition of Gaisuku is to move our production, 64% of our production, into package. Look, we've just launched something called the sugar stick machine, which is the little sachet in a stick that you get in Starbucks. And the cost of those small 5-gram sugar package, when you aggregate it to metric tons, it's like $3,000 a metric ton. For bags, you get about $800 a metric ton. For packets, you get about $1,200 a metric ton. So the reality is, the smaller you go, the more money you generate per unit. So, so you have to make it into a way that sugar becomes accessible to the market, but it has to be of the right quality. And, you know, I want to tell you, Gaisuku has an ISO 9001 estate at Blairmont that is producing sugar for the international market in bags and package. We have markets in St. Vincent, St. Lucia, Grenada, Trinidad, Suriname, the entire Caribbean, literally. We are now sending sugar in package to the New York market, the ethnic market in New York, in Richmond Hill and Flatbush, Maryland, Orlando, wherever the Guyanese population is. So, and people who live in these countries who are Guyanese have a sense of patriotism when they see made in Guyana in their supermarket. And people are generally willing to pay a little bit more when they see these things. So we have to continue to unlock value from those opportunities.
Now, we're coming to the end of the program, but my final question to you is this. What percentage of the Gaisuku's production is being used locally?
25%.
So 75% is being sold overseas?
Yes.
Okay. Now, as I said,
but that changes as our production increases, right? Because the Guyanese people, unfortunately, our population seems to be stuck at 750. And thus, there's only so much sugar they can use. But what I can tell you on the global market, India has now closed its export market. The Brazilian production was not most efficient this crop. And hence there's a shortage of sugar globally. So this is the right time to be on the international market. This is the right time. So our ambition is to work hard to expand our production so that we can capitalize on this opportunity.
In closing, let me direct you in your closing remarks. First, I will ask you, what would you like to say to the opposition who closed the sugar estate and to the government, President Ali, whose goal was to reopen it and to make sure it becomes viable?
Look, history shapes our choices. So I really don't want to, those historical events that happened under the Granger government, it's for the record books, and it will be written on. Because I remember in 2016 in a cabinet meeting that when Minister Harmon at that time came out and says it was in the best interest of all stakeholders that some consultations happen. And then they started the consultation, and in the middle of the consultation, on December 31st, they closed Wales. So, and those things have a lot to feed in to the current situation in Guyana today at a national level. So what I would want to say is that mistakes were made, major mistakes were made. I believe that actionable solutions are available, and I would want to call on all stakeholders to give the sugar industry a chance. Give it a chance to re-engineer itself. There's talent within the industry. There is commitment within the industry. And we must not allow that talent to dissipate without getting a fair chance of developing the industry. Now, that said, I want to say thank you to President Irfan Ali and Vice President Jagdeo and Honorable Minister Zulfikar Mustafa. Let's not forget Minister Zulfikar Mustafa. He works beyond the call of duty in making this sugar project a reality. I want to say thank you to them all because at many times the solution was always so difficult to unleash, to create, to get it done. But the policymakers always came to our rescue and help us to unravel it. I'm excited by the announcement that His Excellency made with regards to conversations with Guatemala in bringing some more talent into Gaisuku, because Guatemala is doing very well at sugar, very well. And some of that skill set is vitally needed on the fields of Gaisuku and in the factories. So I want to say thanks to all the policymakers, and of course, our board of directors under the chairmanship of Mr. Ramraj. They've always held our hands and take us forward. And you don't get this subterfuge and deception. You get it clear as it is, and you're always getting help. We're getting, like only last weekend, we went with the board of directors, walked through the entire Rose Hall to get an understanding of where we are. Rose Hall is in the factories ready, the fields are ready, and you'll be reading about some things in the press. Not compliments of me, but people will be seeing what will be happening at that estate, and they will be telling you and the information about what's happening. So on that note, gratitude. I want to close with the word gratitude. I'm grateful for the opportunity to be able to do what I had to do. Albeit it was difficult, but I'm grateful for the opportunity. And let's see what the future holds. Thank you very much, Dr. Rose.
Thank you, Sis. You've been giving us an excellent report on the sugar industry, and I hope all our listeners listen to it and at least will make their own assessment. And I want to give a shout out to Sleeping Hotel, one of the best in the city. If you're traveling to Guyana, go to Sleeping. It has a beautiful swimming pool, a bar, and beautiful rooms. They will be coming on to be our sponsors in due time. So a shout out to Sleeping Hotel on Church and Albert Street in Georgetown. Thank you again, Sis, and thanks to all our listeners. And God bless you all. See you next Monday.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.